Hello, everyone, and welcome to Results for America and IHEP's webinar, State Lessons for Implementing Evidence-Based Post-Secondary Success Programs. We are so thrilled that you could join us. I would first like to thank IHEP for sponsoring this webinar with Results for America, and I would like to recognize Jackie King, the author of the 2 case studies that this webinar will discuss. So we will be sharing the case studies in the chat, and we are so grateful for our panel today. I will quickly go over the agenda and show the first panel with our, today's agenda, we're going to have 2 panels. So an overview of the case studies from Colorado and Massachusetts, and hear insights and lessons learned from those 2 states. And then we'll have a reflection panel about states, what insights the panelists heard from the state panel, insights for implementing evidence-based post-secondary success programs more broadly. And we will wrap up from there. So just a quick reminder, you can use the Q&A feature to ask questions, and we will get to as many of those questions as we can. If not, we will follow up and answer those questions after the webinar. So I am going to next review the next panel. I'm going to turn over to Patrick Carter, Vice President and State Practice Lead for Results for America, to lead our state lessons implementation panel. Patrick?
Thank you, Nicole. Really excited for this conversation today. We're fortunate to have with us 4 state higher education leaders to share how they designed and implemented the Finish What You Started and Success programs. For this panel, both Colorado and Massachusetts teams will give a very brief overview of their program, and then we'll dive deeper into how they use data to design the programs, challenges they encountered, and their accomplishments, of course. And as Nicole said, we welcome your questions too, so please drop them in the Q&A. Now for introductions for our excellent panel. From Colorado, we have Dr. Kim Poast, the Chief Student Success and Academic Affairs Officer at the Colorado Department of Higher Education, and Dr. Cynthia Armendariz, who is the Managing Director of the Colorado Opportunity Scholarship Initiative. From Massachusetts, we have Dr. Lane Glenn, the president of Northern Essex Community College, and Lutful Khan, the Success Senior Program Director at the Massachusetts Association of Community Colleges. Thank you, all 4 of you, for being here today. Before we start going through some of those questions, it'd be great for each case study if one speaker could just give us a brief overview of the program featured in the case study. Colorado team, could you go first, Dr. Armendariz?
Hi, and good afternoon. So our program is focused on the Finish What You Started program, which is a federally funded through the American Rescue Plan dollars. The purpose of the program is to address the decline in enrollment and also the disruption in workforce that was caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And it really prioritizes individuals who were economically impacted by the pandemic, providing both those financial supports, primarily through scholarships, and also those student support services that work with a student from re-engagement all the way through completion. 30 of our 31 public institutions are participating in this program, and thus far we've supported about 3,500 students, but there's plenty of time for re-engagement and recruitment. Our programs, the majority of them are slated to end in June of 2026.
That's great, thank you. Now, Massachusetts, Lutful, can you give us an overview?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Success, also known as the Supporting Urgent Community College Equity through Student Services Initiative, was launched to address the equity gaps and improve post-secondary outcomes at open door community colleges in Massachusetts. The initiative really aims to provide wraparound supports to raise the access, attainment, and long-term success rates for historically underserved students including those students who are economically disadvantaged, first-gen, minoritized, LGBTQIA, and students with a documented disability. The wraparound supports include individualized advisement, coaching, case management, tutoring, mentoring, and participation in a variety of different student engagement activities, such as like financial literacy workshops or trips to four-year institutions. The overall goal really is to increase persistence, retention, and completion, which kind of brings us back full circle to this slide right here. You'll see that when compared success cohorts with their peers, we noticed that there was a significant difference in persistence outcomes, and that's what this slide kind of highlights. You'll see that there's two colors, purple, which reflects the success cohorts, and then green that reflects the matched group. The match group basically includes students who were part of the same college who were eligible for success but did not participate in the program. You'll see that there's double-digit differences in some cases in achievement for some of the success students, especially when compared to the matched group. For example, like 22% gains for students who are Black, for male students, which across the board, regardless of race or age, is one of our more challenging demographics. There's close to 20% improvement in persistence. Although the comparison group was kind of limited, it included about 7 colleges that participated in this. The early findings are definitely promising. And I guess we'll talk more about this throughout this discussion.
That's great. Thanks, Lutful. And yep, excited to hear more about these successes. But maybe we could go back a little bit and talk about what data or information influenced the decisions in your state to create these programs and what other factors were at play. Maybe Dr. Poast, could you answer that first?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks so much. So the Colorado Opportunity Scholarship Initiative was founded in 2014 as a scholarship-only program in the state. And so we were giving dollars directly to students. About 5 years ago, redesigned that entire program to sort of model what we had seen with other wraparound support programs and other student support programs, where we knew that if we could pair both the financial incentives, community matching programs, as well as wraparound support services at the institutions, that we would see a much larger success metric. And what we've seen is that students who participate in both our community partnership program and our matching scholarship program have upwards of a 94% persistence rate as compared to other scholarship-only programs. So that was a primary piece of data. And then we've iterated on all of those programs to sort of tailor them to specific populations of students. And Dr. Armendariz can talk a little bit more about that. But in the Finish What You Started project, we started looking at an outcomes-based approach to our scholarship program, where we looked at pairing community organizations in communities that had disproportionate impacts, and started that work with the outcomes-based with our friends from 1 Million Degrees and Rocky Mountain Partnership. And then COVID hit and sort of shifted course and got an infusion of federal dollars that allowed us to run both of those programs, both the community-based one and an institutional program, kind of side by side. And we're right in the middle of that right now.
That's really helpful. Dr. Glenn, how about you? What data or information kind of influenced your decision to create this program?
Sure. Two types of data points, one around student success and the other around finances. The one around student success, the main argument that we made to accomplish the resources for this program was the observation that when colleges have money for supporting additional wraparound services, whether it's through TRIO funds, student support services, Title V funds, any one of these special initiatives or philanthropic dollars, we know what to do and it works, right? We know the 3 or 4 or 5 things, you've heard a couple of them already, that tend to work and tend to show the kinds of double-digit results that Lutful was displaying earlier. So we pointed to some of these, right? We've got a 40-year-old TRIO program on my campus that demonstrates year in and year out 90+% persistence, 90+% academic standing, and graduation rates of 75% and higher within 8 semesters, which is all double digits beyond normal student progress. We pointed to a few programs like that to illustrate that we know what to do with the resources when we have them. And then in terms of the resources, we pointed to The range of per student spending from private four-year institutions and public four-year institutions and flagships to less selective state universities, high schools, vocational schools, and so on across the range, from $70,000 at the high end to $13,000 at the low end, which is community colleges. The argument is quite simple. The students who need the most get the least, and the students who need the least often get the most. Within a few miles of each other in the Boston area where we're located, are Tufts University, where the average family income is $225,000, and 77% of the students come from the top 20% of the income in America. And a few miles away is Bunker Hill Community College, where the family income is $36,000 a year, and only 25% are from the bottom 20%. So two types of data, student success data and financial data, to make an argument to our legislature that we needed the resources to put this program together.
Thanks for laying that out, Dr. Glenn. So we've kind of established the landscape about data and information used to influence your decisions around these programs. Maybe we could talk a little bit about how did you decide on the design of these programs? Both of you touched on kind of some reference programs, both nearby and far away. But maybe Dr. Armendariz, you could talk about how you decided to design these programs and what role evidence played in them.
Yeah, thank you. As Dr. Poast mentioned, we've worked in this space for some years now, and we have two distinct programs. One, the Matching Student Scholarship that provides scholarship, and our Community Partner Program that provides those wraparound services. And for many years now, we have seen that those programs work really well separately, but when a student is receiving both of them, the student fares even better in terms of retention on their path to completion. So when we were building out the Finish What You Started program, we utilized what we'd already learned from those programs to help to build the basics or the structure of the Finish What You Started. In addition to that, we had participated in about a 2-year project with an organization called Third Sector that was, and they were the ones who supported us with the outcome-based financing portion to really dive into our data, not only for COSI, but statewide in terms of where was the need and also what populations we may focus on, which ended up being adults and students of color. And so we really utilized that information. There were some best practices on how to support students that came out of that as well. So both of those projects and programs have helped to influence and build the Finish What You Started program.
Great, thank you. Dr. Glenn, how about with your program, what role did evidence play and how did you decide on the design of these programs?
Sure, I referenced the importance of looking at TRIO programs and student support service programs. Many of those provided the templates for the various success programs on the 15 community college campuses across Massachusetts, because as we looked at the track record of those types of grant-driven programs at the colleges, we saw several versions of success, like what Lutful showed you earlier. And they came as a result of people, right, of coaches, of tutors, advisors, hiring staff to provide these wraparound services. Oddly, it might seem, the strongest direction that we gave the campuses when we stood these programs up is, this is not for experimenting. This is for doing what you already know works at your college. Show us what works, the data, and the funding will come to scale that up. And if you don't have something at your college that's already working, then let us help you bring something from another college. It varies by student population, of course. We have institutions that are Hispanic serving institutions like my own, Anapazi institutions, Black serving institutions, a number of different populations in our state. So each one has slightly different programs, all of them drawn from either existing programs at the campuses that have shown their value or borrowed from another campus, and all of them involving mostly personnel costs.
Thanks for that. So we've talked about the impetus for these programs, how you found other programs or models or design elements that have been proven to work elsewhere. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about what you've done to evaluate the programs that you've implemented to ensure that they're continuing to show the results that you expected based off of that existing evidence. Dr. Armendariz, could you talk a little bit about the evaluation components and either what you've done so far and any plans for future evaluation?
Yes, thanks. So currently all of our programs have an evaluation component, and this program will as well. Since the program is still new, it will take a couple of years before we can utilize our state data to match and track these students, but we are gathering all of the data so that we can be prepared when we are able to access that. We are also in constant communication and working with our partners that are on the ground administering the grant. And we hear from them about the different pain points and challenges of the program, but also, the areas of success. And we use that that feedback to make changes to the program along the way. But in terms of a full program evaluation, that will not happen for a few years still.
Just one follow-up question on what you said. What steps are you taking right now to collect that data so that you know it's in place for future evaluations?
Yeah, we have many federal reporting requirements, but also state reporting requirements as well. And so all of our partners are required to submit annual reports where it's both a narrative component about, the challenges and successes of their program, where can COSI provide technical assistance, but also student level data. So we are gathering, personally identifiable information from all of the students who are participating so that we can match them through our state records, but also eventually on workforce data as well.
That's great. Looking forward to seeing those evaluation results in a few years. Lutful, how about on your side, what have you done to evaluate these programs and any future plans for evaluation?
Yes, absolutely. So the evaluation of success is really driven by a logic model that acts as a roadmap for the initiative. So the logic model kind of explains the problem that the initiative aims to address, such as like decreasing equity gaps, the populations who will be served, such as those that were called out in the legislative language, and the strategies that will be enacted. So as Dr. Glenn mentioned, the wraparound supports by hiring people to provide these key services. It also details kind of this anticipated impacts of the initiative and the measures that will be used to reach the intended goals. So, long-term looking at fall-to-fall retention, course completion, 3-year graduation rates. Overall, though, like the results from the ongoing evaluations of success are shared annually each year. We provide a report every spring. And then also the program administrators, the success leadership team, representatives from the Department of Higher Ed, and also MAC, we all kind of look at the results and determine whether or not adjustments need to be made in order to improve the efficacy of the initiative. There's also a 10-year outcomes plan that kind of ties in with the evaluations component that we've recently developed. And the evaluation piece is definitely in collaboration with the Department of Higher Ed, because we work with them to collect the data from all of the 15 campuses. And the data that's collected include, demographics, student engagement, how often are they meeting with their coaches or advisors, et cetera, to really collaborate all this data. And then we kind of create these reports internally.
Thank you. So maybe we could talk a little bit about sustainability of these programs. Dr. Armendariz, in Colorado, you mentioned that this program is funded with American Rescue Plan recovery funds, and we know these are kind of one-time temporary funds. So how are you thinking about the future of this program, and what lessons would you apply to future work?
Yes, so the Adams County project, the Finish What You Started Adams County project that's mentioned in the case study, was to be a project that would eventually lead us into a statewide initiative. We had planned for that a few years down the road. With the federal funds, we were able to move that timeline up very quickly, and we hope to use the data and the learnings from that for both of those projects to determine some of our next steps. Currently, COSI is in the middle of a program redesign and kind of evaluation and review of our whole program. We have 9 programs under our general umbrella. And so we are trying to determine, I mentioned early on that the matching student scholarships and the wraparound support services, they are 2 distinct programs, but some students receive both. And so what we are hoping to do as we move through the next year is determine where there is some real alignment between those programs and how we could maybe shift our program in general to make it a one type of program similar to what Finish What You Started may be doing now, where the students are receiving both. That program review and redesign will launch in fall of 2026, around the same time that these federal funds will be ending. So we're hoping that some of the work that we're doing just in general in our space will lead to providing some of that bridge funding or some additional capacity for some of the entities and institutions that we're working with. That though is sometime down the road, so there's still plenty of time for planning, and we'll be working with our stakeholders and our board and different members of the community to help determine how best to build out some of those changes and move that forward.
Great, thank you. Dr. Glenn, how about for you? How do you plan to sustain and institutionalize and maybe even expand the successes that you've seen so far?
Sure. When we just entered our fourth year of funding, this is not from temporary funding necessarily. It's from annual appropriations through our state legislature. When we made the argument nearly 4 years ago, we based it on how much a TRIO program on one of our campuses costs per student, which is at the time $1,561. It was an exact figure. We said, look, for that amount of money, here's what we can do. It would have cost over $100 million were we to try to fully fund all of the students in the state. So we said, let's go for half that, 56 million. The first year, we actually managed to get $7.5 million from the legislature. Then we built it to 10. Then we built it to 14 for 2 years in a row based on the success that Lutful shared with you a moment ago. The plan is to continue to demonstrate that success and make it so obvious that this is good for the workforce, as somebody pointed out a moment ago in the chat asking the question, that this pays for itself, right? Through degree production and through producing the kind of workforce that the state needs, that this is short money. So far, so good. We've been building it year over year. The ambition for next year is to go from 14 million to 18 million and eventually to that 56 million.
Great, thanks for laying that out. Maybe we could talk a little bit about some challenges. We've talked a lot about the successes that we've seen so far, but there had to have been some speed bumps or roadblocks along the way. Dr. Poast, do you want to talk about those from Colorado's perspective?
Yeah, I'm happy to. When I first came to the department, the Colorado Opportunity Scholarship Initiative was run by 2 people, and then we had a separate program that was providing wraparound support services called the Colorado Challenge, which Dr. Armendariz led. We redesigned that entire program and brought folks in. There was also a call from the legislature at the time to sort of wind down the program or do a study about what it would take to wind the program down. So through some evaluation, though, we convinced the legislature that this actually was working and our redesign was working well, and have continued to build on that. I think one of the biggest challenges, though, has been the infusion of federal dollars has accelerated our work to such an extent that we have 10 staff now working 9 different programs. Some of those dollars will go away at some point. And the level of reporting structures that are required for some of these things are monumental. So we report to the governor's office, we report to our recovery officer, we report to the feds, and then we have our own internal reporting. And so it is a lot to manage in terms of the kinds of documentation that's required. The other challenge, I think, is that some of these programs were authorized through statute back in 2021 as a response to the pandemic, and then the federal funds came in as a portion of that. And the biggest challenge, I think, was the interpretation of the state law versus what the feds required. And trying to match those things up. How do you demonstrate that a student is eligible for these fundings because they've been impacted by the pandemic, et cetera? How do you verify income? What does the statute say versus what do the federal rules say? And the federal rules didn't come out until I think April, but the dollars were in place in January. So there was a lag time in terms of how we were trying to figure out how to match those 2 things up. And then I think the other large problem will be what does our state appropriation and continual funding look like as we're moving forward once the federal dollars go away? How do we keep the momentum and make the argument to the legislature that this is indeed a program worth investing in? I think those are the major challenges.
I'm sure lots of people on this call can relate to challenges of federal ARP reporting in general, but the timing associated with that was definitely challenging. Lutful, how about on your side? What were some of the biggest challenges that you saw?
Well, I mean, with any new initiative, there comes a lot of growing pains. However, thanks to the collaborative structure of Success, we really were able to navigate through most of the challenges. The biggest issue that I can think of for colleges were really staffing up. At the time, we were in the midst of a labor shortage across the board, and higher ed was definitely not immune to that, which made it very challenging for some campuses to have dedicated staff in place to effectively launch their programs. That impacted, how they ended up recruiting students, perhaps, kind of redefining their programs, and so on and so forth. But despite these challenges, we still managed to double the number of students that we served between fall 21 and fall 22. And as President Glenn mentioned, we also doubled our appropriation from fall 21 to fall 23. Although the colleges were struggling at one point to staff up, many of them have made the changes needed in order to be fully staffed now.
Thanks, Lutful. You mentioned broader economic conditions related to labor shortages, and in your case, you're talking about staffing. But I'm sure employers would be interested in partnering with you for these programs. Do any of those relationships exist for either the Massachusetts or Colorado programs? And if so, what do those relationships look like?
Not for Massachusetts currently. We've tried to keep the design of this pretty simple. And although we've been tempted a few different times to add, enhance what we're doing, as you'll hear me say later on this program, one of our other challenges that Lutful didn't just mention was that, right? Trying to stick to a simple, straightforward plan that demonstrates success and not get tempted off the track. Employers probably do have some value to add here, and we want to make sure we're getting this 100% right on all the campuses to make sure the students are getting across that particular finish line. So currently, employers are not directly involved in the Success program.
Dr. Poast?
Yeah, I will add to that a little bit. We have been having some internal discussions about how we focus some of these resources on high need, high demand industries. That is a theme that runs across Colorado. We work very closely with our workforce development centers and our Department of Education. And I don't think we're there yet, but we have been having conversations about, how do we help institutions scale up those programs where we know that we need workers in our state and particularly regionally.
Thank you both. I should have noted that question came from the chat. And so if anyone else has other questions, please put them in. We'll be glad to ask the panelists. So a couple questions ago, we talked about the challenges. Maybe you could talk about keys to success. Dr. Glenn, you just mentioned kind of keeping your eye on the ball and staying focused on what the purpose of these programs was. But are there other lessons to be learned about the successes that you saw here? Maybe Dr. Armendariz, if you could answer that, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. I think for us, institutional partnerships has been one of the most crucial aspects of success for us. I mean, this work, as Dr. Poast mentioned, has not been without its challenges, ups and downs here and there, but without the institutions and their teams supporting this work and the students, it just wouldn't be possible. We are, over here at the state level, and we are not on the ground providing, working directly with the students and whatnot at that level. And so that has been just extremely helpful. One of the requirements of this grant is that the institutions must hire staff to support the students specifically. And also there are some funds available for some of the administrative portion of this. So that has been just really important as well. We have some institutions that have been able to support multiple positions, others who it's a one person kind of shop doing all of the things with reporting, one-on-one interaction with students. So that has been just really important. And then I would say the combination of supports, that combination of financial and the wraparound student support services. This is primarily an adult population who have many different competing priorities, and being able to provide both of those supports has been really important for us.
Thank you. Lutful, how about you? What were the keys to success?
Ours was very similar as well, in the sense that the statewide work really around success really was a highly collaborative effort, and that is really the essential fabric of success. We established a success network that allows for enhanced collaboration and resource sharing. This network includes a success leadership team that consists of college presidents, MAC, the Department of Higher Ed, and a few people from different campuses. There's also a cross-agency coordinating committee that includes representatives from MAC, the DHE, and members from each of the 15 community colleges across the state. And we also have monthly meetings with the success administrators, where we talk about day-to-day operations and program issues. And then there's also another meeting that coaches and advisors that meet quarterly to discuss other resource sharing opportunities. So overall, what success does is it creates this network to really bring together key people and connect them on a regular basis. So, it really fosters communication, a sense of belonging among students and campuses and amongst the staff. And it's really bringing people together. The other thing that I can think of too is that overall, the people that are being hired as a result of the success funding is making a huge difference. Through success, students have a dedicated point of contact at each school. So they might have a mentor, a faculty member, a coach, an academic advisor, someone there to support them from all the way from entry to graduation. And this is making a big difference in terms of the types of experiences that students are reporting having at their school. So for example, at Mass Bay Community College, the wait times to meet with an academic advisor during peak time was cut by like 70%. So students were able to meet with their advisors very easily, have access to them, whereas other students may not have that opportunity. In addition to that, in several surveys that were conducted for students, one at Northern Essex Community College, one at Greenfield Community College, students expressed this sense of belonging, this increased sense of belonging, because they felt so connected to their campuses and their success point of contacts at schools. And lastly, success, through the success network, they're able to kind of partner with other departments within their institutions. So at Middlesex Community College, they were able to partner with their Office of Admissions to implement a new CRM online application that really allowed students who were LGBTQIA to self-identify so they can easily be connected to resources upon entry into their institutions. So overall, success is this web of support that's bringing together the people and also the students in this larger community.
Thanks for that, Lutful. So maybe zooming out here, Dr. Poast and Dr. Glenn, we have people listening to this conversation from across the country. What advice do you have for other states or other institutions who want to embark on this work? You shared this arc of using data to identify a problem, drawing on evidence-based strategies from existing programs, evaluating the programs that you stood up to make sure that they're working and achieving their goals. What do you have to share with other states, Dr. Poast?
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that we've been increasingly more aware of is that the profile of students are changing in terms of what students both demand and what kind of pathways they're looking for. And then there's this broader scope of, what does our workforce need? So I think, for the federal government to really be thinking deeply about how we're serving adult students, how we are ensuring that there's seamless transfer of credits, and then how we're providing wraparound support services to our students on the ground, I think is really critical. And I think, providing not just the financial assistance, but also a platform where they can receive wraparound support services to direct them into whatever path makes the most sense for that student.
Thanks. Dr. Glenn?
I think there's a logical way of thinking about what you ask. There's a financial way of thinking about what you ask, and there's a political way of thinking about what you asked. And the thing that cuts across all three of those, for us anyway, has been clarity around a formula for this work and sticking to a plan. And here's what I mean. I mentioned earlier a dollar amount, $1,561. We repeat that constantly, right? You should be spending on your campus about $1,561 per student in your cohort. And when we budget, that's what we do. And the expectation there is for that, you should be getting double-digit improvement in these categories, right? $1,561 equals 10% or more in persistence, in retention, in completion. That's the other part of clarity. The folks that Lutful just mentioned who meet regularly hear those three words, persistence, retention, completion, 3 or 4 times in every meeting. We're relentless about that. That's what you're to be measuring and monitoring. Other things are important, sense of belongingness, all those things that we're all paying attention to. And at the end of the day, if persistence, retention, and completion aren't improved, it won't matter. The money won't continue to come. The students won't graduate. So those are the things that matter the most. And then sticking to the plan, right? The formula for the money, retention, persistence, completion, and then not getting distracted, sticking to that plan of staffing up, providing the support services, not doing too much experimenting, scaling up what works. That's hard. It's hard to convince over and over again, 15 campuses across the state not to stray too far, right? Because we want to try things. And sticking to the plan as the money grows and we can serve more students is vital.
Thank you both. A question from the chat. Are there lessons to be learned from what you've talked about here today for K-12 institutions? Have you talked to colleagues working at lower levels of education? Just any partnerships established there?
Maybe from my comments about sticking to the plan, you might guess that no, we haven't. I mean,
Yeah.
Certainly we're a robust early college state, as most states are at this point. And although many of the practitioners involved in success have wanted to try to venture in that direction, we have purposefully inhibited that so that we can stick to the plan that we're on. So the answer for us is no, we haven't.
Part of our federal funds, there is a program that was carved out for K through 12, specifically around FAFSA and supporting to increase the number of FAFSA applications, and CASPA, which is the Colorado State Financial Aid application. So we just a small portion of funds, about 1.5 million, is specifically carved out for that program. We only have a handful of applicants or of current partners in that program. There are still many federal rules and all of the federal reporting requirements, which at times can be even more of a heavy lift for those grantees because they may be even smaller. We primarily work with rural partners in that area, but the same requirements, the same challenges. I would say staffing has been a big one for them as well, but we do have a few in that space.
Great, thank you. All right, one last question, Dr. Poast and Dr. Glenn. We've touched on federal funding a little bit in your case, Dr. Poast, federal reporting that we just talked about as well. How can the federal government best support these kinds of efforts? Dr. Poast, you want to start?
Yeah, I think much of what I had already said, the sort of the recognition that the student profile looks different. I wanted to just respond a little bit about the K-12 space. We've been in a study period of looking at blurring the lines between K-12, higher education, and the workforce. And some of the recommendations out of that report will be, how do we more intentionally structure our funding streams and different programs that we offer throughout the whole continuum? So I think that's really important. And then, I think just realizing that, students who are coming to us now look different than they did 20 years ago. And so the formulaic way of allocating federal dollars or state appropriations, those sorts of things, I think could be enormously helpful. And then helping us to really disaggregate our data in a different way to be able to tell a different story about the swirl of students and how they're moving through our systems, I think it'd be really helpful.
Thanks, Dr. Poast. Dr. Glenn, anything to add?
Sure. Perennial lobbying interest for community colleges is increasing. The amount of money available for things like TRIO and student support services and Title V and those kinds of programs that serve minority serving institutions in particular. And yes, I mean, we need to continue to lobby for more of that, because basically that's what we're doing here is we're taking state money and stacking it on top of federal money to make more of it, right? We've demonstrated that it works, that it's short money. And then on top of that, and Dr. Poast referred to this a bit, how the federal government tracks, monitors, reports things. We still have to remind pretty regularly federal agencies that full-time equivalent bases for funding and for policy work does not work well for community colleges. Every one of our students is a human being, her or himself. And when you have to roll them up into full-time equivalencies, it often doesn't make sense, and it often doesn't work as well. We learned that the first round of federal stimulus money early on in the COVID crisis, and had to go back and fix it in the second round such that community colleges were not at a disadvantage. So when it comes to policymaking and funding, paying attention to the details matters a lot as well.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank all four of you for your time today. It's clear that one of the factors of success that you didn't mention is intrepid leadership, and all four of you clearly bring to that to these programs. So thanks so much for your time today, and appreciated the conversation. I'll pass it back to Nicole.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you to each of our panelists for sharing your projects and lessons learned. It's really exciting to see this work and to see evidence driving these important college success decisions and outcomes. Now we have a great panel of experts who will provide reflections and insights on how these lessons can be applied more broadly. Leading this panel is Kelly McManus, Vice President of Higher Education at Arnold Ventures. I'll turn it to you, Kelly.
Great. Thanks so much, Nicole. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We only have a little bit of time, so I'm going to move very, very quickly through this conversation so we can start really focusing on taking away some of those important lessons. So our panelists today, we have John Lane from SHIO, Ellie Eckerson-Peters from IHEP, and Kent Philippi from the American Association of Community Colleges. Just to jump in, I'm going to start with you, Kent. What were your initial reactions in hearing from our colleagues in Colorado and in Massachusetts? What really jumped out at you the most?
So a couple of things jumped out at me. First of all, probably more questions than answers, but that's, I think, understandable at this point in the game. But I think that the focus on directing resources directly to students is what really struck me with all these initiatives. And I think the importance of direct services to students and putting funds towards that, because we know at community college in particular, that's really been a traditional challenge with our colleges, is getting actually the funds to support that advising and academic support for those students. And I think building on some of the lessons of the ASAP programs and things like that, which is useful. Certainly these aren't full-fledged ASAP programs like the CUNY program, but I think we're learning those lessons and trying to figure out how to apply those to these different areas, I think is very useful. I also like the focus on these more kind of growing the TRIO sort of populations and expanding out towards that to different sort of populations. One of the things that struck me is that there's a lot of work going on in our colleges right now for changing what's going on. So there's Guided Pathways work, there's a lot of other things. And one of the questions that I had was, how do these things kind of map into that? And while I appreciate Dr. Lane's perspective of keeping it consistent, when you're trying to keep it consistent, yet trying to embed it into other change, there's probably going to be some tension with those sorts of things. And I think that by and large, this will support those sorts of programs, particularly like Guided Pathways and the support service that fits into that. But I'm just curious to what extent those sorts of things are going on in these conversations. The other thing that struck me was the difference between the Colorado and Massachusetts, where Colorado is not just a community college system, but a four-year and community college system. And it'd be interesting to see how that works differently in those different sort of settings, and to what extent that is really sort of impacting those sorts of the way the delivery is being done. And certainly there are different sorts of projects and different sort of initiatives, but I think those are interesting things that struck me. And then just the many different ways that it's being implemented. I think too often people take a method to say, this is the way you do it. You have to do it this way because that's the way it was done. Giving the college the flexibility to interact and do it in a way that makes sense on the campuses. I think both the programs are doing that. Clearly in Massachusetts, that's the case. I think that can be real helpful for doing that, but it makes the evaluation side of it more challenging because you're not sure what exactly it is that's doing that. So, I have to take on my background of research and data versus the background of implementation strategies. And I think that there's going to be a challenge for understanding the true evaluation of the projects. But that said, I really appreciated that. So I can stop right there for some initial reactions.
Yeah, well, John, I want to bring you in because from the SHIO perspective, I mean, you get to see kind of across all of the states. What parallels do you see from others that could be applicable in other states? What are some of the lessons learned that we should keep in mind in thinking about the Colorado and Massachusetts examples?
Well, thank you, Kelly, and thanks to Colorado and Massachusetts for sharing some great insights. Two ideas do come to mind, and one is what Kent just responded to in the case of success in Massachusetts, finding the right complement of scaling the 4 or 5 ideas that are perennially effective solutions, and finding that right complement with the innovations, with the right fitting that is specific to certain campus circumstances and conditions. And that's one adaptation that we've seen across the country. If I thought of other states, Montana, Ohio, West Virginia, New Jersey comes to mind. Some good things are happening in Connecticut as well. So that balance between what we know that works and how that intersectionalizes with some opportunities that are right fit to current circumstances and locations. A second observation that was highlighted here and that our members share with us time and again is the emphasis on key partners, not overstating the value. It's difficult to overstate the value, but I have in mind in particular the work that's happening in Colorado with the Rocky Mountain partnership, which is wonderful to learn more and more about it. But I cite this because we hear not only from states, but in our engagement with current and past students, we hear regularly amongst different population types, whether rural populations identified by race, example, that a facilitator, whether it's the institution and staff, or whether it's a partner organization who's partnering with the state and the institutions and their staff. Anytime you have that facilitator between the student who has shared life experience, shared educational experience, they help to catalyze the student's own sense of some success in their forecast. And so, one example of our work that we've tried to expand on at SHIO is learning more about some new insights. I think of the researcher at University of Virginia, for example, Yoy Tibbetts, and he started some work during the pandemic on this point. What does it mean to center the student experience in a way, and of course, during the pandemic, so the returns are very early. But what he has seen and published is the improved persistence, completion that was discussed earlier. And that's what we're hearing when we convene our student panels, as recently as earlier this calendar year in Colorado, that the improved student experience can lead to improvements in what matters to us most.
That's great. So Ellie, I mean, IHEP is very prominent federal facing as well as state, but especially federal facing organization. So I'm going to try to combine my question with the question that we got in the Q&A. And what I'm most curious about is how we can collaborate at the national level to elevate these success stories and share best practices. But I also want to think about not just what can we do to collaborate, but what is the federal government's responsibility here to really ensure that resources are being used effectively, across all types of states in all contexts. And so I know that that's a two-part question, and I'm not going to put it just on you. I'd love to get Kent and John in on that as well.
Well, that's an excellent question, Kelly. Thank you. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me from these case studies is just they really underscore the importance of using evidence to fund, design, and implement promising practices, devoting the time and resources to building an evidence base during implementation and delivery, and then drawing on that evidence base to continuously improve programs and really scale up effective strategies. And so I think one strategy that we can employ at the federal level to support this work is really to support investments in evidence-based approaches to improving student outcomes and in building a strong evidence base on what works for whom and under what circumstances. So, for example, IHEP and Results for America recently partnered to develop recommendations for how the Department of Education can maximize the authority that was granted to the Secretary of Education to set aside up to 0.5% of funding from certain Higher Education Act programs in order to carry out rigorous and independent evaluations and collect and analyze outcome data for any HEA program. And so we gathered input from leading higher education, evaluation, and policy experts to really develop these recommendations, because the set-aside authority provides an opportunity to really build that rich evidence base to support continuous improvement of HEA programs in particular, so that they can better serve students. And another example of both investing in building this evidence base and in investments in scaling up evidence-based approaches is the Postsecondary Student Success Grant Program. And we are really champions of this program. It's a federal grant that's intended to equitably improve post-secondary student outcomes by leveraging data and implementing, scaling, and rigorously evaluating evidence-based activities to support data-driven decisions and actions. And so these funds are helping institutions continue and scale their evidence-based completion efforts, and includes this evaluative component, much like the programs that we heard about earlier do. And so, for example, this program is helping to scale up work that was honed through IHEP's Degrees When Due initiative, through which we worked with nearly 200 institutions across 23 states to help re-engage stopped-out students and develop more equitable practices to help all students earn their degree. And so this was an example of efforts that were really coordinated centrally at the state level, but now federal funding can be helping to scale those practices and continue to build the evidence base on what works and in what contexts.
So with about 30 to 45 seconds each, John and Kent, I'm curious for your take. What can the federal government do to make sure that we ensure student success kind of across the board?
Ellie, just great advice. I would offer to complement that some more work, anything that those of us who have some proximity to federal audiences to leverage that. Our members are coming to Washington. We are coordinating meetings and visiting with their congressional delegations in both chambers. We're meeting with peers at the Department of Ed, the Department of Labor. We're trying to complement our conversation around resources and investments and data and work at iPads with conversations about accreditation and state authorization and financial monitoring, but also student mental health with the Surgeon General's office. So normalizing those federal and state relations in ways that really can open more awareness for states to opportunities to engage federally.
And from our perspective, from the federal side, there's two sides of it. One of it is the data side, and the National Student Unit Record System would really be a big plus for doing that, as well as collecting information on non-credit activities. And related to the non-credit activity is the workforce Pell. where we get more money for those students who are taking those shorter term programs and get them into the workforce quickly, so that you have the wraparound services that can be provided with the support of that federal financial aid for that. Those are two things that are very important for us. But, you know, just the flexibility of some of these TRIO programs is very important for our college to be able to use it in a way that makes the most sense for them, rather than overly restrictive ways of doing and using data. So those are some thoughts off the top of my head for that.
Great, and put in my take my moderator's privilege to put in a strong underline for the data at the federal level. Nicole, I will turn it back to you and just thank you so much to this panel for your reflections.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, John, Kent, and Ellie, for those helpful reflections. And thanks to all of our panelists and for all of you for doing the hard work to drive important outcomes for students. We know this is not the easiest path that has been mentioned, but such important work. And as a reminder, you can access the Colorado and Massachusetts case studies on RFA's website. We will also, the link is in the chat. So please read and share these examples of evidence-based program implementation so that we can spread and scale post-secondary success programs across the country. And also, please join us next month as we release the state standard of excellence and learn how red states and blue states are shifting dollars to what works. So that event will be November 15th at 2 p.m. So we will drop the registration for that event in the chat as well. And I will just wrap up and say thank you so much. Thanks again to IHEP. Thanks to our panelists and to the author of our case studies, Jackie King. We appreciate all of you and look forward to continuing this conversation and advancing these recommendations. Thank you.